I think the best example of that was hiring a dedicated virtual assistant before I could realistically stomach the cost of having somebody 20 hours a week. And once I did that, and it was uncomfortable for probably 6 to 8 months. Once I did that, and then I really got out of those repetitious tasks that were really holding me down and started to just enjoy being a landlord and get to do the more creative projects. So I've done a lot of things that are interesting as far as finance goes.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Scale Smart, Grow Fast podcast. Today we have an amazing guest, Stephanie Cabral. She is a former attorney turned entrepreneur who mastered efficiency by building scalable systems that freed her from the daily grind. Leveraging automation, strategic delegation, and process optimization, she transformed her real estate business into a streamlined operation while maintaining high-quality service. Now she helps business owners and professionals apply the same principles to scale sustainably, reduce workload, and gain more freedom. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Harley. I'm excited to be here.
I think people would be really interested to hear a little bit more about that transition from being an attorney to being this real estate investor, entrepreneur, and speaker. Could you maybe tell us more about that background?
As I love to say, I'm a recovering attorney. So I knew pretty early on that being in the legal space was not the life that I wanted. And so I took a job where I was basically underemployed, which felt terrible at the time. And it was one of my greatest shames, and turned into be one of my best assets later because I was in a place I couldn't afford rent, which everyone thinks like, oh, you're a lawyer, you must have made tons and tons of money. And I was like, if I had pursued aggressively being a lawyer, that would have been the case, but I pursued an exit. And so to do that, that trade-off was I had a lot of flexibility. I could pursue other things, but I was underemployed. And so while I was working at the firm, I started doing real estate. I started as a commercial agent. And basically to afford rent, I bought a duplex. And it took me a very long time to get over how mad I was at that suggestion, because how could I afford a house when I can't even afford a rent? And once I started to figure out like, how could I afford it? Then all of a sudden the world just totally opened up. So I bought my first investment property. It was a condemned duplex in a great spot in town. And I bought it using a 203K loan. And then I started buying more I had this epiphany when my first tenant moved out and I had to pay my own mortgage. I was like, oh, that sucks. I don't want to do that again. And so then I started buying more and realizing other people can pay the mortgage. So I was buying real estate. I'm still at the firm. And I also started working as a commercial real estate agent to expedite my education, exposure to landlords, and just mentors in the space. And then while I was doing all of that, I was doing lots of reno on projects. Everything I buy is basically a BRRRR project. And so I was just really overwhelmed, ended up really focusing on systems to just like get my ducks in a row and feel secure while I was doing all these projects. And then all of a sudden I blinked and realized that I had enough in rentals that I was comfortable making that leap of faith to leave the firm, and through projects, commissions, education, and a really strong rental base, and I've optimized through long and midterm rentals, I was able to transition and officially become that recovering attorney status that I wanted so much. So I'm so proud of that. And that was 5 years ago, and I have not looked back.
That's an incredible story. And a lot of people, when they think of like real estate investing, they're all often like, oh, that's just like a passive kind of investment strategy that's like a long-term thing. You made it a job. Like you took this on as a business and went really hard on it, doing multiple strategies with being the agent side of it, as well as being the investor, the live-in, the house hacking strategy. That's really impressive. So I imagine to do that, there were some mindset shifts that you had to make that were key to helping you take that leap and be successful there. Could you maybe share some of those mindset changes that you had?
Yeah, I think the first one you hit the nail right on the head was recognizing that my portfolio is a business and I could not treat it like a hobby. So when I first started, it was like I was collecting rent from the other unit just by having her put it in my mailbox, right? And as I started to get more and more, I recognized that what I was building was actually an exit strategy, but I could not add 10 times the number of units and still do the same processes that I was doing because it was so much manual work. And it required me to just be very involved in everything. And it just wasn't sustainable and it wasn't scalable. So once I started to look at, okay, I need to treat this as a business. And if I were to take on 10 times the number of units, is what I'm doing still a good strategy? And so I started to implement those systems and processes, incorporating tech tools. And I always like to tell people that I am tech curious, but not tech savvy. So I think that makes me very relatable because a lot of people know there's so many solutions that are out there that could help your business, but you don't know how or you don't know how to implement them. So I have chosen to hire mentors and help people make decisions for me or along with me that will enable me to use technology to scale. So that has been a big one. And I think another mindset piece that's really made a difference is the fire aim strategy rather than the other way
Okay.
around, where
Yeah.
sometimes I have to take moves before I'm ready. And I think the best example of that was hiring a dedicated virtual assistant before I could realistically stomach the cost of having somebody 20 hours a week. And once I did that, and it was uncomfortable for probably 6 to 8 months. Once I
Yeah.
did that, and then I really got out of those repetitious tasks that were really holding me down and started to just enjoy being a landlord and get to do the more creative projects. So I've done a lot of things that are interesting as far as finance goes. Standard 1031, a reverse 1031, historic preservation tax credits, tax lien foreclosures, a couple creative financing deals, deals that require more mental energy than I would have had if I was just going through the grind of the administrative work. Having administrative stamina means that you don't have stamina for the creative space. So I needed to free that up. And that was something that I was not of the mindset at the beginning. I was like, I'll just save all my money and do it myself. And
Right.
that's a trade off for time, right? So that was a big change for me too.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because many business owners, investors, entrepreneurs, they struggle a lot with delegation. It's a big challenge for people. How did you identify the right tasks to either automate or outsource in managing your portfolio?
Yeah, so I refer to this one task as my gateway drug. So in Connecticut, we can't transfer the water bills out of the owner's names. So even on single family homes where the tenant is responsible for the water bill, I couldn't transfer it out of my name. So first, I was just having the tenant go in to the account and pay the bill. And what I realized very quickly is if they don't, whose credit do you think that would affect? Mine, right? So I wanted to take that in house. And then I started doing a RUBS strategy where I would invoice them for it. Harley, this drove me crazy. Every month I had to go in and I mean, it wasn't complicated work, but I had to go into the accounts and add the invoices to their rent portal. And it turns out I'm a terrible employee because I wasn't doing it. Right. And so that for me was the best example where I was like, this is a very easy, I'm just going to write a little description on what to do. So my first SOP was born, my baby SOP that has now become hundreds of pages long. And I took that and I outsourced this to a virtual assistant who basically worked 4 hours a month for me at the time. And it was a success in that one role. But as I started to recognize that I had more and more things that I wanted to do, I needed somebody a little bit more robust. So that relationship didn't last, but the concept of delegation absolutely just took a hold. And I always love that example because it is my gateway drug.
So it sounds like now you've kind of mastered leveraging virtual assistants. What advice would you give business owners and investors who want to integrate VAs into their operations but are afraid of like giving up control and quality?
Yeah, so I think the concept of extreme ownership is really important where your input is matches your output. So the more information that you can give them to do the work and make it foolproof, the better their work product is going to be. So it's your responsibility to give them a really strong SOP. So mine has multiple steps with context of what is the end goal of this step, then very specific what are the big steps, and then exactly how to do it. And then it's screen captures, it's video recordings, it's templates with instructions on how to fill out the templates, right? So these take a long time to build, but just like financial investment, where you might put a lot of money in at the beginning, but then it pays you back over time. I consider that with time investments too. So I think that is really important. And the second piece is you have to give them time to get comfortable with you and understand your expectations. So if I had jumped ship within the first 6 months, I wanted to multiple times, I would have lost this opportunity. We've just passed 5 years of working together, and she is
Yeah.
my lifeline, so with my specific assistant. I think if I had jumped ship, I would have really lost that opportunity. And then the last piece that I'll say is I heard over and over that 80% done as good as you is good enough. And that was something that I really struggled with because I do have very high expectations. And so 80% feels like a failure to me, honestly. And so I've
Mhm.
had to just recognize that that's good enough. I'm not losing money over 80%, over that 20% gap, and I'm gaining so much. So that's something I sometimes still need to remind myself of when I catch errors or something like that. But in general, I'd say she's better than 80%. And functionality concept is, I think, important going forward.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the phrases that we've developed personally in our family, and actually kind of originated when we were doing farming, we had a farmette in Northern Virginia, was good enough is perfect, because we could not
Mhm.
do everything ourselves. We had to get help. We were leveraging virtual assistants for like technology side and helping with our real estate, but we also had physical labor on the farm. And of course, people are not going to do it as good as you. But if
Yeah.
that frees you up from like shoveling manure out of the chicken coop to go do high level strategy for sales, that's a great investment. And so I'm glad you mentioned that. And then the other thing that I think a lot of people might think about as you were rattling off how you've got SOPs, you've got systems, like that can be a little overwhelming for people. And the reason it's overwhelming for people is because they don't have an assistant yet. And that's something we all often find is like the reason you don't think you have time to like get these systems and SOPs in place and have that assistant help you is because you don't have an assistant yet. And you just got to make that investment, like you said, and start, and then it pays dividends for the long term. So let's kind of shift gears talking about systems, right? Systemization is a game changer for scalability. What are some of the core systems that you've put in place that have allowed you to scale without adding more complexity?
Yeah, I think the first one that I'd recommend is just some rent collection portal, right? I mean, there's so many low or no cost options that just completely take the automation and run with it. So you don't have to be adding late fees or reminding tenants. So that one is it's just such a simple example, but it's really worth mentioning. So if anybody out there is a landlord and isn't using a rent collection portal, that is your number one piece of homework. I hope that's your takeaway from this call, along with many others. And then I think another one was I started to automate the turnover and the management of my midterm rentals. So I have 5 midterm rentals, and that's a mix of entire units and by the room. And these are notoriously more management intensive because of the turnover, because of the frequent contact, right? When you move a tenant in and move a tenant out is the most frequent touch points. And so I was doing a lot of this, and I found that I didn't even want my virtual assistant to be responsible for the nonstop communication because that would be taking up too much of her time. So this was my foray into automation. So I really started to focus on triggers of dates and actions that would start workflow processes. And now my tenants have so many emails from me with consistent messaging that I don't get emails from them asking me the questions that are in there, right? So frequent touch points is really important. And I have actually customized my building block, my management system, so that it's not just triggered by date and emails, but it's also triggered by behavior. So like if we are not renewing or not extending a midterm rental lease, which doesn't happen often, but it does happen. In that case, normally there's some dynamic that we aren't enjoying, that we don't think it's a fit. And so in that case, we kill the trigger that reminds them to give us a review, right? So they can still leave us a review, but we don't actively encourage them leave us a review. Where we do when tenants that are on great standing and we've had them for 6, 7 months and they started as a 2 month contract, we're very persistent in getting that review. So those are things that have helped me build a presence online and have a great reputation and also be completely hands off. And my virtual assistant is kind of hands off on that too. She's just managing, making sure that the triggers are properly filled out and so that they can run.
Every day, your top performers are buried under emails, scheduling, and reporting. Work that doesn't move the needle. The result? Frustration, burnout, and worst of all, lost revenue. That's why we created the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers, a simple, battle-tested framework to eliminate busy work and unlock your team's full potential. Inside, you'll get the exact steps top executives use to retain A players, boost productivity, and free up their team for high-impact work. Stop losing revenue. Go to workergenics.com/growthhub or check the episode notes to download the Executive's Guide to Scaling High Performers now. I love that. So you're not only leveraging your time with a virtual assistant, you're leveraging your assistant's time with this technology. So you're getting so much more value from the assistant than others might come in and just say, I'm just going to have them do all that. And they forget about it and they just delegate everything rather than thinking strategically like what you have done with how can I systemize this so that I'm not getting rid of my VA, but I'm letting them operate the systems.
Yeah. And, it's not just about time, it's about reducing the human error component, right? Because if they're on autopilot and they're following an SOP, they're copying, they're pasting, there's always going to be some errors, and automation just reduces all of those things. So for all those reasons, when I talk to the people that I mentor on systems and processes, I always suggest that they start with finding an automation tool and then they use virtual assistants to fill in the gaps, because a lot of times there's a hybrid component of automation and delegation where the system has to be updated, but once it is, then it runs on its own. So automate whatever you can, your big core responsibility, and then use the virtual assistant to make it run faster and without you.
Now, one thing you kind of touched on with the emails going to your tenants is, balancing these kind of high touch customer service or also client service with efficiency can be tricky sometimes. How do you maintain the quality of the relationship that you have with them while still keeping the workload manageable and using technology and systems and the assistant?
Yeah, so I think one, we try to send only the messages that we would actually send out, right? So the multiple touch points are ones that we give them advance notice of what's coming down the pipeline. Then we give them like, all right, it's imminent, and then here it is, right? And so those are natural touch points, and we try to mimic our automation to match what we would be doing naturally. So when I'm building a process, I usually do it manually first to figure out how do I want it to run. And then I think tonality is really important, making sure that you're consistent in the way that you approach your tenants, just the way that you embrace them. And that's whether they're tenants, whether they're clients, it's the same concept, right? So having that human element in your automation is important. And then I don't know if this totally answers your question, but I love talking about it, so I want to throw it in there, that I think that you can still processize customization, right? So I do think it's important to have unique communication. So on a move-in, for example, instructions on how to get in, whether the room's to the right or the left, or where the parking is, that's specific to the unit. And so we might have a structured email, but there are elements that we pull in that are unit specific or tenant specific, so that the tenant is getting a very customized personal email, even though it's an automated email.
Now, technology and automation are key to scaling smart. You've mastered this. Do you mind sharing some of your top tech tools or platforms that you swear by for running an efficient business?
Yeah, so I use Turbo Tenant for my rent collection portal. I have used Podio to build out my automation management, but I'm actually moving all of that to an Airtable softer combination. I think we've talked about this actually. And so this is something that I can take all the automation of my management of rentals, including not just the midterm rentals, but also the move outs, the vacancies, the work orders, all of that, and manage that on one platform. And with the softer integration, I can actually have it deployable to others as well. So this is something that's been asked for a lot from the people that I talk to, is like, how do we use what you've built? So I'm working towards that actively, which is a really fun and exciting development. Slack for internal communication is just absolutely phenomenal. I personally love the Slack to Gmail or Gmail to Slack integration. I don't know if you use this, but we use it all the time for our bookkeeping records. So we have a channel on Slack just for receipts. We also have a channel on Slack for action items. So if something comes in, a receipt, for example, rather than me waiting 6 months to remember what it is and categorize it, I just shoot it off to Slack and it stays in that receipts channel. And that has completely transformed my bookkeeping, and it is now up to date, and I can do strategic tax planning, which I was not able to do for many years because I was doing it too retroactively. So the Slack integration is phenomenal. And Loom is one of my favorite tools, specifically with the AI piece. You mentioned that one of the problems with SOPs is they take a lot of work to build, but with Loom, they actually will watch. You're recording the screen, you're recording your voice, and you can choose the transcription. So it'll just take a transcript, but it will also summarize in an SOP format for you. So you can really expedite your journey to delegation automation through Loom. So that's another tool that I love.
Those are some great tools, great recommendations there. Now, one question I kind of had for you was, you've done these extensive projects where you're like really systemizing things that probably were not systemized before. Do you have a specific approach for managing these large projects so that you don't get overwhelmed? Because, taking something like what you have now, going from nothing to that, could be overwhelming to people. What advice or approach would you recommend people take when they're getting started to get to this place?
So I think that goes back to mindset, recognizing that frustration is a growth opportunity. And you're totally right. When you take on a new project and they're not systemized, you're going to be overwhelmed. And so recognizing that that's the opportunity for you to grow and systemize is the same feeling that you should have when you're putting 20% down or you're going in and making a financial investment, and recognizing or keeping in mind what your end goal and what your life will look like after it's systemized. And I'm going through this right now. I'm not actively buying a lot of rentals, and I just bought a 3-family and a single family, and they both needed extensive work. And so now I'm going through and just really trying to systemize that work. And I'm remote. So I'm spending my winters in Georgia. My properties are in Connecticut. And so I have not managed a construction project remotely. And honestly, the frustration I had at the first month allowed me the clarity of, there is a buffer that I need between me and the tradesman, and that's my project manager. So I hired a project manager, and now things are just going so much better within the past week. So, I mean, I'm very grateful for the frustration. I don't enjoy it, but it is a tool for growth for me. So put your mindset in the right place and just keep the big picture in mind.
So a common theme I'm hearing from you is one that is in the Who Not How book, right? It's you get the right people, whether it's, kind of top down like advisors helping you make decisions with technology or systems or learning skills. And then also from top or bottom up, where you're delegating to a virtual assistant or to a project manager in this case. Would you say for someone who is wanting to just implement one strategy tomorrow to get more efficiency and flexibility in their business operation, what would that be?
You should do a task tracking exercise. So you should look at, where do you actually spend the majority of your time? And I think that will show you, what are you doing repetitiously, and just start there. Right? Start taking that low brain power, high frequency activity off your plate. And those are also the easiest to build out for SOPs as well, these like low brain power, high repetitious items. So I'd say like start there. And if you're not sure, actually like write down, what are you doing every day? How long does it take you? And how much do you like it? Because that's another factor. If you just love data entry, maybe you don't start there, right? Maybe that's something that you hold, and you get rid of something that you genuinely do not like doing, adding water bills to your tenants' invoices, right? Something like that.
Love it. Well, Stephanie, you have shared so much valuable information with our audience today. If people want to learn more about what you've got going on and get in touch for some follow-up questions, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
So I actually just started a TikTok account so that I can share this journey, the tips, tricks, and hacks, best practices, tools that I'm using, things like that. So I'm going to ask that you share that handle with your users, and that would be the best way. So find me on TikTok.
Awesome. We'll have that in the episode description and the links. And if you got value from this episode, do one quick thing. Hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future strategies to help you scale smarter. And do you know a business owner or a colleague who could use this? Share this episode with them. It could be exactly what they need right now. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, leave us a quick 5-star rating. It helps reach more leaders just like you. And again, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.